let me jump in. So let's do this. So, Midnight Mass is from 2021, and it's about an isolated island community experiences miraculous events and frightening omens after the arrival of a charismatic, mysterious young priest, and it's created by Mike Flanagan. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. With returning actors, if you if you slept on this, watch it. It's a slow burn. It does takes a minute for you to get into it, but it is something where I feel like you really do need to watch. I might spoil what happens in a way, because it's kind of important. Well, because there's a big issue that's happening. So I do recommend it being like a watch that you do and not getting spoiled before seeing it. But I will say, knowing what happened and rewatching it, I caught a lot of things, and it spoke to me differently, because the things that characters said had so much more weight, because I was like, oh, you say that because of this. Specifically with the new charismatic young priest, he be saying stuff.
It's like giving it away. But I'll also, one last thing, I promise. I'll also say, the first time I watched this, I was like, I'm bored. I don't want to do it. And I stopped. Literally, when it was popular, when everyone was talking about it, I remember it was trending on Netflix. And I was like, I just don't feel like watching a whole hour for why. And then I rewatched it now and I'm like, wow, I was so wrong. This is really good. This is so emotional. So if you tried to watch it before and it wasn't your thing, maybe give it another shot. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
I will say, when it starts to amp up, it's amping. And then it's it. It just goes. But it does take a minute to get there, so you do have to be patient. So Midnight Mass is a slow burn horror series exploring the impact of spirituality, our place in the universe, and the horrors that we face when religion is contorted and weaponized. Set on a remote island community called Crockett Island, the story follows the townspeople's small lives as they're greatly impacted by this arrival of the young enigmatic priest named Father Paul. We join the island at a time of returns and arrivals. We're first introduced to Riley Flynn, who is returning to the island after being released from prison after a tragic event that left a young woman dead and Riley forced to sober up. Also returned to the island is Riley's childhood best friend and possibly first love, Erin, who, now pregnant, lives in her deceased abusive mother's home and works her mother's job as a teacher in a tiny school. New Sheriff Hassan is finding his place in a community reluctant to acknowledge their own prejudices. And finally, with the arrival of Father Paul, which means the delayed return of the town's Monsignor Pruitt. So with the arrival of Paul means a delay of Pruitt. Who is there very old.
And in such a small town, it's rare for so many comings and goings.
Yeah. It's a super small community, and we learned that it used to be a little bigger, that it's small because they sold off the land for oil money. Yep. And so a bunch of so it's 100 or less people live in here. Yeah. So any little impact is felt throughout the whole community. So as Father Paul settles into the community, miraculous events start occurring, including healings and strange occurrences that suggest a divine presence. In one instance, a young woman who had been accidentally shot and was then no longer able to, she was paralyzed, she was no longer able to walk, miraculously can walk. What a miracle. We don't have to question those. The science is wrong.
Why question a good thing? It's working.
The big thing is they don't question further because the healthcare system is so expensive and a scam that they're too poor to investigate further. So it's a little setup for some other stories he will explore. So the islanders, desperate for hope and meaning, embrace the miracles, leading to a revival of faith among them. At the start, there's only a few people in the church, and by the end of it, it's packed. It's like, ooh, look at you all of a sudden coming to church because we got miracles. However, you got miracles now? I'll go.
I went to church before it was cool. That's what they said.
Yeah, they're like, that's why I got healed. Now they're like, I got a tummy ache. However, as the miracles escalate and people's deepest desires and secrets come to light, the true nature of Father Paul's presence and the source of the miracles becomes increasingly ominous. Like, so he is a very charismatic pastor, preacher. I don't know what the Catholic specific Catholic term is. Father Paul. He
I couldn't tell you.
Is so what like he's very well spoken and he's soft spoken and kind. And to have a horror show that's based around religion being horror, and then you have this priest and he's not creepy, that he's just kind and soft and caring, and he demands honesty and alludes to giving honesty. I thought it was great. The internet and Gabe thought it was pretty hot. So, but not all of us, watched Fleabag and were forever changed in season 2.
Yeah.
And the priest. That piece from Fleabag, rewired a lot of our brains. And maybe now we read spicy books that make us question our morals. It's fine. So, as tensions rise and suspicions mount, the islanders find themselves facing a terrifying truth about the origins of Father Paul's powers and the sinister force that has infiltrated their community. It's too little, too late. And ultimately, Midnight Mass builds to a gripping and emotionally resonant conclusion that challenges viewers to confront their own beliefs in the nature of good and evil. It is a thought-provoking and chilling exploration of the human condition and mysteries of faith and spirituality. In summation. So this, I kind of alluded to it. Midnight Mass is a very personal story for Flanagan. So Midnight Mass has been a long time coming. The idea was a founding idea of Flanagan's, ever present in his works, that paved the way for him to create his incredibly personal show. So like all the while he was getting approved for all these shows, he was like, okay. But at some point we're going to do mine, right? Like this, we're going to do this other one, right? The beginning scene actually of the show, which is the police blue red lights flashing on the Christ fish that's on like a bumper thingy on a car. It's flashing on that, which is a car accident. That scene is actually referenced in Flanagan's film Hush, when the protagonist's computer is shown, and it's the first lines of her novel. And it describes that. Because at first he did want it to be a novel. He just always wanted, he knew it had to be something. So as he began creating his other amazing series, he held strong to the script for Midnight Mass. And while filming Bly Manor, Flanagan was out location scouting for his other show, Midnight Mass, eventually building the town of Crockett, because he couldn't find one that was like old and sad enough. All the towns were doing fine. Flanagan actually grew up as an altar boy, and his life very much tied to the church, until he went to college, where he was first introduced to other concepts of religion, and he dove into those other ideologies, trying to find one that fit. He said for a while he was like, Buddhism really spoke to him. There's just like a few that he resonated with, but he didn't know there was options. That you could have other ones. And he also had where there was like an older, like seasoned priest, and then later a younger priest that was like totally different, and, threw everyone off. So all the while, him with these ideologies and in writing the script, and he was struggling with alcoholism and recovery. And so the show is an expression of this journey, and it took on a new form as the time went on, and his relationship with sobriety changed to something firm. Like, I don't know what that story would have been, but it's different. And to the point where he has said, it's a very different show with 3 years of sobriety behind me than it would have been before that. I feel that it would have been an incomplete conversation. He said this in an interview. Those conversations were so inseparable in my head that this show was always where they were just kind of dumped. It's where they lived as a record of my perspective of sobriety through various points in my life, in the full grips of it, in the denial of it, and the acceptance of it. And it's just very honest in that way. And you can see that. Like he puts himself into his work, and that's, I think, where it shines. So I think one of the biggest themes of this show is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Right. And as someone who grew up in the church, I resonated heavy with this show. I expected a horror show where a religious town is monstrified by its devotion to faith to, in the end, vilify religion. I really thought I was going to do that. I was pleasantly surprised that's not the case. And so I have a very religious friend who was like, should I watch this? And I was like, no, you good. And I've read, I read a review by a member of a church who was like, this is a great film and it should, or show, and it should teach you things about your religion and how you should be operating in the world. And I was like, yeah. So it doesn't. But I expected it to do that, to criticize and scrutinize religious practice and warn others against organized religion. But I didn't find that in the conclusion of Midnight Mass, not exactly. What I found instead was understanding, a true understanding of the impact of religion, belief, guilt, shame, and the innate need for acceptance and forgiveness that draws people to religion in the first place. There's a conversation in the film, again, of which there are many that stick with me, where the real villain of the story, Bev, a religious, hateful monster of a woman, is confronted by Sheriff Hassan, played by Raul, who was in Bly Manor. Huh? Oh.
I said I love him.
Yes, me too. A lot of hotties in the show. A lot of hotties. Okay. But she's confronted by new Sheriff Hassan, who found faults with his young Muslim son being given a Bible in school, in public school. This is insane. So during this exchange, where he's like, you would all be in an uproar if your kids came home with a Quran. Like, there's no, like, in what world? It's just because it's your... Anyway, during this exchange, she makes horrid remarks about Hassan's culture and the Quran, which he respectfully addresses and redirects to her. He held it very well. Happy coming over that desk. This whole scene is brilliant, showing the ignorance Americans have about the Quran, and ignorance that I myself had at a young age when I was also religious. We weren't allowed to learn about the other options. Honestly, bless public school, because I learned about Hinduism, and that's what changed. That's when I changed, because I was like, that's cool. I was like, we got stories too. We got make-believe as well, but your make-believe is so much cooler than our make-believe. And I was like, okay, who said that mine's right? I had this whole it was a whole moment for me.
Yeah.
So growing up, I, had the same ignorance, especially being someone who was young when like 9/11 happens. Like, I didn't even know the world was different, But I have this strong memory of being introduced to and taught about the Quran by a close family friend who told me how it was very much like the Bible that I had been raised to believe in. No more violence or less forgiving. It's really about the fact that it's a tool and it depends on whose hands it's in. Just like Christianity. It's the same thing. So she follows this up. So he... In the scene, Bev makes a dig at Hassan in the Quran, mentioning its profound violence. And she follows this up by saying she would never preach about Lot in school, missing the entire point that no part of the Bible should be taught in public schools because of its violence. She's like, we don't teach the violent parts, because he's like, there's violence in the Quran. There's violence in the Bible. The Bible is scary. And that's like the point that really struck me, because both of these texts are quite violent. A lot of religious ones are. And I grew up hearing Bible stories, including the horrifying lot, as bedtime stories. And I now understand that they shouldn't be stories that you're telling children, especially not as bedtime stories. They're scary stories they shouldn't know. And Flanagan understands the brutality of the Bible and how it can blend so fluidly into the horror genre. It's honestly perfect the way he did it. But he says, when I was a kid and in Bible study, the horror elements embedded in the Bible are impossible to ignore. You've got angels patrolling through Egypt and slaughtering the firstborn. You've got the river turning to blood. You've got plagues of locusts and a pillar of fire. And you've got a God who's thrilled to just murder people at will and full of wrath. You've got demons. You've got talking serpents. And you've got people being torn apart, torture, and it's all there. So talk about horror, just like read the Bible. The Bible can be a horrific thing already, but these already cultish practices are further twisted into maliciousness with the introduction of an angel, which is the vampire, which I totally get. There was it's long lost to me, the source, but I remember there was like a lore that vampires are the mark of Cain. So Cain did the first murder, and there's a quote unquote mark. He's marked for that murder. And they said the mark was that he became a vampire. It was his punishment. And I was like, I believe that. That sounds cool. It sounds like something rad the Bible would do. There's also, we talked about kind of angel, demon, vampire lore in our vampire episode when we talked about Lilith, or Kat talked about Lilith, who is the first woman who became a demon / vampire, maybe. So concurrent to these horrors is forgiveness and the comfort that comes from the eternal, unconditional love that Christ is supposed to offer. Right? And ultimately, Midnight Mass is a very human story blended heavily with supernatural elements. Each of the people on this island felt real. And in discussing our plan for this episode, Kat, who does not know the Christian or Catholic religion, reasonably asked how this group of people could be so ignorant of the fact that they were bringing about the apocalypse. And this question is why I appreciated the show so greatly. Because I think sometimes people don't realize how easy it is to be led astray when you mean well. And you're right, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So Father Paul, who's later revealed, so here's spoilers. Big spoilers. Father Paul, later revealed to be a rejuvenated, reborn Monsignor Pruitt, truly believed he was doing the right thing. So he was at this very vulnerable point. You know, he had dementia. He was old. He had lived his life and it had some regrets, and he was like in the promised land, and then he's faced with this monster and he's reborn in this horrific way. How else would your brain that's like that reinterpret that? And so for me, he was never a villain in my eyes. Like he does, like not to excuse, he's bad. He did bad things, but he wasn't like, I think he becomes corrupt and unhinged, but I always felt that he had the best intentions. Like he wasn't doing it to hurt people. He thought he was saving people, and also he's a person.
Yeah. So, it's almost like impact matters more than intentions.
Yeah. Like he's not evil like Bev.
Here.
He's not evil, but he was a bad guy. Okay. Not discrediting that. So an interview with the actor Hamish Linklater, who plays Father Paul, spoke on this role and the desire to portray a good-natured, well-meaning person confronting some dark truths that we as viewers had to trust him as much as the townspeople did. And he said, how do you take somebody who you think is a rational person, or a person of faith, or a person that you think is a little like you, and walk them into this place where they would willingly kill themselves for an idea? And he continued in that interview saying, one of my first conversations with Mike was, I'm playing a priest in this genre. I just want to make sure you don't want me to be skewed or sinister or scary or anything like that. The guy's trying to do the right thing all the way through it, as far as his understanding of what the right thing is.
Yeah.
Because I felt that Monsignor truly cared for his people. And after experiencing what he did in that moment of true vulnerability, with the baggage of a lifetime of religion and regret, that he thought something profound and biblical had happened to him, and that he had been shown the light and a way to help his people. But he was also just a man. He really was just a guy.
Yeah.
And so he was swayed by his own interests and desires. I'm sure there was the temptation of power in there. And if the Bible is to be believed, then I think that's precisely how it would happen. Right? We wouldn't know we were bringing on the apocalypse. We wouldn't know to stop it, because we were the ones bringing it. Right? I think if the Bible is real and the apocalypse is supposed to happen, that we do it to ourselves thinking we are doing something good. Because I believe people would... Most people try to be good. There are plenty of people who aren't being good. But I genuinely, general populace do try to be good. No one is genuinely trying to hurt people all the time. So the apocalypse won't look like a big bad evil, because then we'd stop it, right? Or we'd at least try.
I'd fight against it, yeah.
Or you'd like hope that that's the case, right?
Put in some effort. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of trying to do it now. Big bad evil happening. I don't think it's the apocalypse, but it certainly feels like that for a lot of people. And so we try to stop it, right? But if if we're going on Bible is real, apocalypse is going to happen, Revelations, it has to happen. Like, it's supposed to happen. Just like Jesus had to die in the horrific way that he did. There wasn't, he was like, do I got a dad? Are you sure this is it? And Dad's like, yeah. Get over it. Go into the desert for 40 days. Think about it. Come back and do it. Okay? Someone will betray you. We don't really... It's fine. We want them to. So what better way to ensure it happens?
The Matrix. I'm sorry.
What better way to ensure that it happens than to make it look like a good thing? This is all me preaching as a former religious child.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense that that's how people would do it. Because as you said, like, they just... I remember watching Supernatural and like being like, yeah, demons, I guess, would be trying to corrupt people, sure. But like, I didn't think it would go down how it did in the show, where it was like, you gotta fight the big bad. I totally agree that we're all, like, humans in general are pretty impressionable, and we would think we're doing the right thing. We'd be trying to help. It's like the one, I quoted her before, but she said, like, people are kind, but without like discernment. I'll try to like quote it retroactively, but like, it's a whole thing where like, people want to be kind, but sometimes they aren't using their critical thinking skills or common sense or whatever is common. I don't know. But like, like discernment. So people would think they were doing the right thing, and it would lead to bad.
Yeah. And we're so isolated in our world. And I think, like, if God is real and he has this grandmaster plan to manipulate the people, like, he would know and would be the best person to manipulate the people, and would concoct this thing, right? Like, that's unstoppable. Like, that's the whole thing. It has to be unstoppable. So it can't look evil. Like, the second coming of Christ, or like, the Antichrist is supposed to look like a Christ figure. People are supposed to be like, that's it. He's the cool one. And even knowing that the Antichrist is supposed to exist, like, why would he tell you that if that would give you an upper hand to notice? You're not going to know. You're not going to know. That's not how it's supposed to work. Again, not real.
How are they going to
know? Big stories, fun stories. But yeah, nobody's going to know. Someone who eventually we will cover it, because Left Behind was a nightmare for me as a child. I couldn't sleep for like 2 years from the nightmares I had from watching Left Behind. And I was a child that I didn't do anything wrong. I wouldn't have been left behind, but I was like, that's it. Revelations is coming, and I'm going to be left here all alone. So I have an intimate knowledge of what the end of the world is like, because it scared me so much. So you want to know your enemy, So I want to talk about a spiritual awakening. So where the Conjuring series, which we tore apart, highly recommend you listen to that episode. The Conjuring series' approach to Catholicism is uncultured, unnecessary, and manipulative. Midnight Mass is a story told from a true fan, someone who understands religion and its beauty and horror. Right? I've said before that I find Flanagan to be a huge fanboy of whatever it is that he's working on, right? He so greatly loves, appreciates, and understands the founding media he is influenced by in his shows, and it comes through beautifully because of that. In The Haunting of Hill House, something so much his own resonates with the love and appreciation for Shirley Jackson, haunted houses, and the horror genre. Bly Manor, too, is a love letter to grief and horror and in life. And in this show, I can see his dedication, appreciation, and honest critique of religion, right? Midnight Mass is a story about spirituality. It's about hope and perseverance. Flanagan shares the impact of his upbringing in the church and shares how it can be healing and helpful. And as a fan, he comes from a place of care, right? Cautioning against the misuse of religion, how easily it can be turned into a weapon in the wrong hands when fanaticized, when it is no longer about a higher being, a question about our place in the world and what it means to be a good person, and instead revolves around people and placing them in positions of power, which is one of the big reasons why I stopped being religious. I was like, I'm not praying to no man. No, ew. No, thank you. Regular guy, who's that? That's why we weren't Catholic. I didn't want to talk to a priest.
It's fair.
But his passion for blending horror with reality elevates his work every time. And as the New York Times noted in a recent profile, Flanagan has earned a reputation for what might be called humanistic horror. While never skimping on the nightmare fuel, he believes that horror can offer something deeper, which they all can, but he does a very good job of it. So in one of the other incredibly impactful conversations, again of which there are many, Bev is confronted in the end by Riley's mother, Annie. Finally, Bev is told what we've all been thinking. She says, "You are not a good person." I was like, she could have stopped there. It is just desserts, and it feels good to see her sinister smile falter. But the line that stayed with me most is when Annie Flynn accepts her son in all his sin, right? She acknowledges that, yes, he was an addict, and he took someone's life, but that makes him no less her son. And even more importantly, it does not make God love him any less. And she says, "God loves him just as much as he loves you, Bev. Why does that upset you so much?" And I was like, oh, it's like, oh my God, you just ruined this whole lady's career. It's such a line. And it's so true.
It's with the burn.
It's because to me, Bev represents like American religion, which is like, it's not real. It's a cloak they put on, and it's a weapon. And I feel like that's the question we need to be asking people who are like trying to use their religion as a way to control other people and condemn them and say like, you're going to like, you don't have that power, first of all. Like, if you're religious,
just a guy, you're just a human.
If you're religious, you're just a person of the congregation, you know you don't have that power. And you should know that God loves everybody all the same. Yeah. Like, that's the whole, anyway. And it's in this moment that
why does that make you so mad?
Why are you so mad that you're equal to us? Something that could be so beautiful for everybody else.
So it's almost like racism infects things. Yeah.
Racism, all kinds of isms. It's in this moment that we confront the real villain, not taking any of the onus off of Monsignor, whose people temples this whole town. Jim Jones is it's pretty awful. It is a little triggering, to be honest. That the true villain, I think, is the bastardization of religion, the corruption of it, and the making of it into a weapon. So for me, Bev was the biggest villain of all, because unlike Monsignor, who believed he was helping others, Bev was always trying to control them and to be above them. She represented this flimsy American Christian ideal that infects and corrupts our government. In an article on the University of Chicago Divinity School titled Midnight Mass and the Specter of Terror, writer Sahar Gumkor shares, "It is likely that many people will view this series as one that warns of the fanaticism inherent to religion, against which secular prophets have long sounded the alarm. But Midnight Mass presents something far more interesting. The social rot in the island community had sunk in before the revitalization of the church made it a prey for fundamentalists. One cannot watch the show without reflecting on our current times, the contagion of Trumpism, the resurgence of ethno-nationalism, and proliferating conspiracies. We are being warned of the threats of human depravity, the breakdown of community, a looming insularity, and how these dangers can stir the monster within us, a monster that can don the mask of piety." And then in a review on Vox by Romano, who we've actually quoted before, titled Why I Felt Betrayed by Netflix Midnight Mass, they share the eerie reality that a character like Bev mirrors, saying, Bev's complete readiness to usher in the Book of Revelations might sound over the top, but it really isn't. As I watched Midnight Mass, madness, I was frequently reminded of Mississippi. Oh my God. I was frequently reminded of Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, who recently defended his leadership of the state with the worst pandemic death toll in the U.S. by claiming that people who believe in the afterlife don't have to be scared of those things. Insane. A real person said that with power. Anyway, also, Ajay Romano, totally valid. The critiques in that article I get it. I get the anger.
Yeah.
I'm coming from a different place. So Midnight Mass ultimately is a story of redemption, rebirth, and acceptance of our place in the world. What happens when we release ourselves from the heavy burden of mattering, of having a place in the world, right? Instead, we become the cosmos, dreaming of itself, released from obligation to ourselves. Myself. That's the whole problem with the whole thing. That word, self. That's not the word. That's not right, shares Erin in her final moments. Kat's going to explain more, but she says, the electrons of my body mingle and dance with the electrons of the ground below me and the air I'm no longer breathing. And I remember there's no point where any of that ends and I begin. I remember I am energy, not memory, not self. My name, my personality, my choices all came after me. And close this out in a personal essay on Bloody Disgusting. Flanagan shares his belief in the supernatural, saying, I don't believe in miracles in the way they're described in the Bible, but I do believe in miracles in a different way. The miracles in our lives, some we make, some simply happen to us. The miracles of parenthood, of creation, of growth, and of forgiveness. This show is a miracle. I do believe that. It's a tiny, fragile bubble, and it clung on for years and years, finally coming into existence quietly, delicately, in between moments of seismic continental shifts in our world. Religion, I believe, is one of the ways we attempt to answer the two great questions that ache within us all. How shall we live, and what happens when we die? And I don't know the answer to the second question, although my thoughts, wishes, and even my best guess are articulated in this show. But Midnight Mass has, over the years, helped me at least begin to answer that first question. And so, as Erin lies dying, she spends moments reuniting with the universe. Monsignor Pruitt reconciles with the life he was denied. Sheriff Hassan and his son, Ali, pray in the face of a rising sun. And Bev contends with the meaninglessness of her existence, a life wasted on wanting and needing superiority. And the town of Crockett sang to the heavens, forgiving each other and themselves for the horror they wrought, accepting their human faults and releasing those sins to a higher being, and return to the cosmos to dream another day.
Yeah. Stinking beautiful.
Yeah, that's what Flanagan is.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know what kind of spiritual I am, but it did really, like, I was raised absent of religion entirely. Like, I don't know any of the things. No one taught me. I went to church a few times, and they were negative experiences, and then I was like, all right, that's all I need to know. And that's because I got the version that that Bev is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Just
that'll turn you off.
A community, very like neurotypical. Everyone's talking about each other behind their back. Like,
Yeah.
gross. Didn't like it. Would not go again. But I've had positive experiences in some religious settings where it's like the people do care about each other and it's nice. But ultimately, I think I'm just like more spiritual. I believe we go back to the earth, all that stuff. So I was like, this is the thing. This is the thing that I think. So that's crazy. And I didn't have like any of the context for it. So there were so many like clues or like hints like, hey, something's happening here. And I was like, I don't know. I've never read the Bible. So I'm just like, that means something, I'm sure. It's warning me about what is to come, and I had no context, but I thought it was beautiful ultimately.
Yeah. Also, anything Bev says, because when she weaponizes parts of the Bible, and she says stuff, and I'm like, that's not what you can't be saying stuff like that. You're so twisted. It's like, that's not what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just, I've met Bev, I've met her before. Like, there's like people who manipulate words in order to get the outcome that they want, in order to get selfishness. And it's like, if you think about, like, as you said, like American religion, it's very self-oriented. Like, that's the whole thing. That's imperial. Let's manifest destiny. Imperial, like, that's what it is. It's gross. Yeah, it's inherently going to have this like skewed concept of self that actively goes against the teachings that are written out. So it's very contradictory ultimately. But I thought the critiques he gave were like really nice, and yeah, I just thought it was neat.